Welcome and thank you for attending my Regulus talk. Regulus is one of the witch cult's archbishops, representing greed, and I feel he, like Elsa, had immense promise. In that way, I believe his strength was comparable to that of Broly from Dragon Ball Super. I mean this in the sense that Broly, despite having very little training, was able to match and even outperform the franchise's protagonists, while Regulus achieved something similar with what little he had. Regulus was never one to train, but think what powers he may have gained if he had taken the time to experiment with and perfect the variables that his authority provided him. Now I'll tell you about his entire life before the anime, his goals, and what little future he has now that he's fighting the only two people who can stop him. A fairly dysfunctional family lived in an unknown town about which we know nothing, but the members of this bloodline cared deeply for one another. If it wasn't clear, I'm talking about Regulus's family. The father was inebriated, yet he nevertheless brought the correct meal to the table and sincerely attempted to be a decent father. The mother had often complained about the household's limited income, but when the time came, she apologized for it. His siblings frequently mistreated him, but they were the first to offer him their piece of food whenever Regulus spilled his. A normal person would recognize that their family is neither the best nor the worst, but Regulus lacks standard common sense, and instead of recognizing that everyone was struggling, he saw his other family members' actions as an attack on his self-proclaimed great being. He believed that his mother had no right to whine about money because it bothered him, even when she apologized for doing so. He thought his father was useless because he couldn't provide him with a sufficient source of money to allow him to live a luxurious life, despite the fact that he tried to give him gifts whenever possible. He found it offensive that his siblings shared food with him since he assumed they did so out of sympathy. Nothing his family did truly meant anything to him, and if it did, it was simply to annoy his existence. It seems clear that the country he destroyed was not one of the 4 big nations, but rather an unknown and potentially minor country. The only individual to survive this unprecedented devastation was a neighbor his age. Regulus always appreciated her gorgeous face, but he preferred that she never smiled. She did not smile when he murdered her parents, killed his siblings, or destroyed the country. He believed that her gorgeous face ought to be unmodified at all times, which is why he considered it a common norm in his future marriages. But one day, this would alter. His wife started smiling. It's unclear why, but Regulus believed it was unfair. She was dying and laughing because he would never find someone who loved him and he would always be alone. Regulus wondered how it was possible for his wife to say and affirm such things about her own husband. It is unclear whether his wife died of old age or found a method to terminate her own life as a result of the archbishop's carelessness. Personally, knowing Regulus's view of transitory beauty, I doubt he would want an elderly bride. Hence, I prefer to believe that the canon version is that she used the opportunity to terminate her life. This would be the first and only time Regulus would build a mausoleum for one of his wives, proving that she was precious to him in his own peculiar way. Because he did not want to marry someone who had deceived him, he vowed to only recruit virgin ladies. And he stuck to this ideal until he found Amelia, who was so pure that she had no idea what it meant to be a virgin. Since then, Regulus has decided that he will only recruit ladies as innocent as the protagonist. There is little record of Regulus's actions in the world after burning his hometown. The only thing we know is that he went to Amelia's village some 100 years before the series began. But it is a story you are most likely already familiar with. I believe the only detail you are unaware of is that, in the web novel, it was planned for his appearance not to be like the one we know, but for him to have a black and gray robe. I'm not sure how well that would have worked out, but I believe I prefer his present design. It is also hinted here that he formerly possessed a black box with an authority, but this is not confirmed. It is simply a possibility. It's worth noting that he intended to make Fortuna Amelia's aunt, wife number 79. But when he failed, that slot would remain vacant until someone with the same attributes came along. Ironically, this new person would be Amelia, who, 100 years later, would take on the post that her aunt almost once had. During the attack on the Elior forest, we learn that Regulus had a mansion where he lived with all of his wives, and while we don't know where it is, I believe it must be near the border between Gusteko and Lugunica, as Regulus claims that his wives were nearby. I'd like them to revisit this location in the future, at least in a side story. Following that, Regulus continued to acquire brides, eventually gathering a total of 291 women. However, during his wrath, he is claimed to have killed 238 of them. We know this because to Sylphie, the blonde girl who represents the wives, it is known that Regulus murdered all of her relatives when he kidnapped her, and she frequently considered suicide. But she did not do so because the former wives' representatives, i.e. her predecessors, protected and instructed her not to antagonize Regulus. These would eventually be killed by the archbishop, but Sylphie, in gratitude for these acts of goodwill, chose to take on the position of representative wife as a way to repay the girls who had previously protected her. It is also known that from time to time, a compassionate soul attempted to save them from Regulus, but they had little hope against the Archbishop. Because this happened so many times, they eventually stopped believing in the possibility. That is why they respond negatively when Subaru and Emilia try to save them, because they do not feel they can stand up to Regulus. Regulus was tasked with go to the fortified city of Garkla 15 years before the protagonist arrived in Lugunica. Supposedly, the Archbishop was hunting for something he had been assigned. It is unknown what he was looking for, but according to the web novel's canon, he sought an object from a witch. However, in the official canon of the light novel, this section is deleted, and it is merely said that he was hunting for something, but no specifics are provided. It was there that he would face Kurgan, and while knowing he would lose, Kurgan resolved to fight him while buying time for the rest of the population to flee. Furthermore, it is claimed that Kurgan resolved to defend the city not because he was a great patriot, but because he detected in the little governor of that area traces of the essence of one of his adopted sons. Stride Wallachia, the Archbishop of Pride. This becomes more interesting when we find that the small governor was actually Vincent Wallachia, who was 10 years old at the time. If you read the Wallachia arc story, you'll understand why this curiosity is so compelling. Regulus appears to have taken Kurgan's body after killing him, and someone from the cult later revived him. Thus, we encounter the corpse in the 3rd season. After the events of Arc 3, in which Subaru fights Betelgeuse, he would finally appear alongside Lei before Rem and Crush. But this is a story we already know, so let us go on. And now, in Arc 5, the arc that the anime is currently adapting, it is revealed that before his initial appearance in front of Emilia, Regulus was inspecting a mural in a cathedral with Sylphie. This is where he'd eventually escape and meet the protagonist, but it has been his entire story until now. I firmly believe that if Regulus had trained, he would have been considerably stronger than what was seen. He never had to exert any effort. Thus, all of his abilities were essentially simplified representations of his true potential. For example, when he cut off Subaru's arm and leg with his power, that happened because Regulus used his authority on the wind and small objects, disconnecting them from the flow of time and turning them from simple objects into absurdly broken ones. In fact, we also saw that in the anime, he used his authority on a large mass of water, but unfortunately, this part was poorly animated. Beyond the fact that the scene does not play out as it does in the novel, the water is supposed to be completely frozen in time. However, the animation shows it moving. In principle, the water should have had the same offensive strength as when it was used to sever Betelgeuse's arm or slice Crush. Nonetheless, we observe many drops land on the heroes without causing any damage. Before anyone says anything, I know they escape using Emilia's ice skates, but as I previously stated, in the novel, they escape considerably earlier, whereas in the anime, the escape occurs much later. I appreciate that the anime may have taken these liberties to create suspense, but in the end, they had to tone down Regulus's attacks a little. Another way he uses his power is to share his invulnerability with others. We saw this when he rescued Emilia from Sirius's flames. Emilia should have been burned, but Regulus' touch preserved her. I know Regulus is invulnerable. However, he can increase his invulnerability by using his Lionheart skill on himself. This is how it is described. For some reason, nothing appears to be able to reach him. Reinhardt even admits that at times, no matter what he does, he feels unable to touch him. There are other applications and interactions between his Little King power and Lionheart. However, as I previously stated, these are simply fundamental interactions, such as, I will apply this ability to this other thing. Regulus appears to have never bothered to explore the full range of his authority's conceivable combinations. I know this sounds like a criticism, but I believe that, at the end of the day, Regulus's laziness with the application of his power works nicely. After all, the Archbishop's arrogance eventually leads to their downfall. This is just speculation, but in reality, Reinhard could have taken care of him alone if he had launched a large-scale attack that also took his wives with it. Of course, the knight would never do that, but he does have the means to do so. Additionally, in later arcs, A technique capable of cutting concepts would be revealed. This method is employed by Cecilus's sword and reed, both of whom are weaker than Reinhard. Therefore, it is absurd to suppose that Reinhard does not have that skill. My personal belief is that Cecilus, Reed, and Reinhard could have defeated Regulus without Subaru. I understand that the author indicated that Regulus could not be defeated, but keep in mind that he said this during his Q&A sessions. These sessions should not be taken too seriously, because the author does not give much attention to his responses, and there is proof that he has contradicted himself with various queries in the past. Please bear this in mind before you comment. Emilia does not remember him. How is this an accomplishment? In actuality, it is not, but I believe it is preferable this way owing to the irony of the scenario. Regulus was a man who always wished for people to honor every right he claimed for himself and believed that every action he performed should have an impact on others. Despite his selfishness and efforts, Emilia could never forget that he was the one who assaulted her community 100 years ago. Even Emilia, a plain person, found his presence meaningless. And if you're wondering about his wife, they loathed him, so don't expect sympathy for him either. Regulus' legacy will be obliterated in an instant. Oh, and we can add to his achievements the fact that he was a virgin his entire life. Regulus finds the process of reproduction unpleasant, and because he never loses, he has never lost his virginity. His future is to die. In the closing minutes of his fight with Reinhard, he realizes that while he still has invulnerability, it only lasts 5 seconds and is no longer perfect. Because he was now affected by external circumstances, Reinhard eventually sent him underground with a tremendous attack. And as he falls, he knows that while he is not taking damage at the moment, his body will crash into the ground once his 5 seconds of invulnerability are over. Only then does he realize that he should have used his powers more, admitting that if he had, he could have averted this fate. In his final moments, as the water covers his remains, he desires Emilia would never remember who he truly was, as doing so would only bring her delight for having avenged her mother's attacker. Ironically, his wish was granted, as the half-elf subsequently stated that she had no idea where she saw him or who he was. But that's it for today. But tell me, what do you think about Regulus's life?